Grammatike techne, third eta middle verbs explanation. In this lesson, we'll cover the general idea of third eta middle verbs. We'll talk about the history of third eta middle verbs, and we'll look at how they contrast with irregular middle verbs. All my work upon middle verbs, but particularly third eta middle verbs, draws heavily upon the work of Rachel Aubrey and her master's thesis examining third eta middle verbs, among other things. So let's begin with the general idea of third eta middle verbs. We've looked earlier at Greek's active middle voice system. That is that in Greek, unlike in English and unlike many other languages, the contrast is not between active and passive, but active and middle, and that within the middle system, passive is one form of the middle. We've also met the standard middle formation, the standard middle voice formation, particularly in the present and imperfect system, where you have the active and then you have the middle endings, and so that's what we've met mostly so far. In the aorist and the future tense forms, so ho aoristos chronos and ho melon chronos, we find a second or alternate way of forming a middle. In this course, we will refer to these forms as theta eta middles. Typically, and if you're using Athanadze in the textbook, they are called passive forms. However, as we will explain, it is not more passive than the standard middle, nor is it exclusively passive. So the theta eta middle, it's not more passive than the other middle, and it's not exclusively passive in meaning. What about the history of theta eta middle verbs? Where do they come from? The eta and then the theta eta ending developed out of a suffix in Proto-Indo-European that expressed a stative idea, being in a certain state, being tied, being wet, being red, and so on. That's the origin of this suffix, and that's how it's used as best we can reconstruct in some kind of Proto-Indo-European. You find these forms quite early. You find them in Homer, and you find them throughout the development of the Greek language. In particular, you find eta and then the development of theta eta. That's why we refer to them as theta eta, because the theta is sometimes optional. We then see over time theta eta forms used for intransitive single participant change of state verbs or events. As we'll see in these examples, epage, got stuck. Here we have an intransitive event where the subject of epage is not acting upon an external object and directing transfer of energy towards it. It is single participant, so it doesn't have to be singular, but the participant of the action is conceived of as one party. There's no second party involved. And there's a change of state going from unstuck to stuck. Emneste, here we have a mental process. The participant goes from not remembering to remembering, remembered. Klinthe, here it is intransitive. There's no action upon an external object, but a single participant moves their own body, turned or bent aside. Also collective, emige, mingled. Here the subject is thought of as a collective and is treated as a collective, so it remains a single participant changing their state to the state of being mingled. Where there is active middle alternation, that is where there is also an active verb, the theta eta could come to be used in a passive sense with an external agent. For example, etrepsen. Etrepsen is the aorist and the transitive version of the verb, turned, when you turn something else. Etrapte, turned, intransitive. So here the subject, etrapte, turned themselves or was turned, hupo and then ex. So an external agent can be expressed with a theta eta middle or with a regular middle by the use of the main construction hupo followed by the agent. We also see theta eta forms used for states where it indicates commencement of a state. So here we have a common verb, phaino, which we will see used as one of our paradigm verbs. And in an active and causative sense, it means to make visible. Phaino, to make visible. In the middle, it has a non-caused sense. Phainomai, to be visible. In the aorist middle, the theta eta middle, it indicates state inception. Ephane, became visible. Became visible. So again, this is one historical development of theta eta middle forms indicating commencement of a state. From these two usages on this page and the previous slide, theta eta middle forms spread to encompass more agentive intransitives and a wider collection of passive uses. That is, they began particularly by talking about states and change of states and commencements of states, but they developed over time a broader range of usage and particular passive uses within the middle sphere. So summarizing, theta eta verbs typically express changes of state, which may or may not include true passives, that is, where there is an external agent creating the change of state. Generally speaking, you should think of theta eta verbs as a type of middle, and pay attention to the semantics, that is the meaning of the verb, and the usage of individual verbs. How are they used in the language? Especially where there is an alternation between a regular middle and a theta eta type middle. Often there is a distinction in sense, though not always. Pay careful attention how theta eta middle verbs are used, and you'll see time and time again that they aren't exclusively passive, and they aren't that strange, but they're a second type of middle where the meaning is determined by the interaction between the verb itself and the context and your growing knowledge of the Greek language.